Welcome everyone to today's webinar, What's Next for 2024 Affordable Housing Program and Voluntary Housing Grant Awardees. We're really glad you're able to join us today. I'm Zinat Naderi, Senior Affordable Housing Projects Manager. The Affordable Housing Program, or AHP, is one of several community products offered by the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh. Bank was founded as a cooperative by Congress in 1932, and we assure the flow of credit to our members and support their housing finance and community lending businesses. Our products and services enhance our membership's ability to conduct business and vitalize their communities. With me today, we have several of our community investment team members, so you can put some names with faces and get to hear about what's next for your award. Before I introduce them, I'd like to first get everyone oriented to this platform we are using. Please note that there is a lot of information in this webinar, so the session is being recorded. We will make this session available along with a PDF of the slide deck to all awardees. Make sure to refer back to this information when you submit your first disbursement request. All participants have been muted and their videos are turned off. We have also disabled the chat feature, but do encourage questions in the Q&A box you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We will answer questions as they arise via the Q&A feature. In the event we are unable to answer your questions during this particular forum, we will follow up with a response to the question after the presentation. We will allow for time for any other questions that you may have at the end of the presentation. The community investment team that will be presenting today are Alexis Narotsky, Linda Cruz, Rhiannon Holler, and Megan Kreider. We will also have several other members of the community investment team attending. So with that, I'll roll into the agenda next. Within the next hour, we're going to cover the following topics. With these topics, it's important to keep in mind that the guidance we give today is for 2024 projects only. We know that several of you on the call may have some existing open projects, so please know that this is for 2024 only and that there are nuances for earlier year AHP commitments. If you have any questions on the specifics of that, please reach out to someone on our team. Before we get started on the first topic, we'd just like to take a moment to pause and say congratulations on your award. AHP and the Voluntary Housing Grant are very competitive. Last year was no exception. We look forward to working with you. I will now hand it over to Megan Kreider, Community Investment Business Development Manager.
Thank you, Zinat, and welcome. I absolutely echo the congratulations. From all of us here at the Federal Home Loan Bank, what you do on a daily basis to bring safe and affordable housing into your community to the folks who need it most, it's appreciated and it is valued. The Affordable Housing Program application process, we know it's not a light lift and there is more ahead, but we're really glad that you've been able to utilize this resource to really round out your budgets to get the units developed and those folks housed. I want to take a moment just before we dive in further to the webinar to discuss our community outreach efforts. Many of you may remember myself or my colleague Fred Banuelos here on this slide as really your initial point of contact during the application process and understanding of the affordable housing program. But now that you have that commitment of the HP Award, we will begin to transition you to our working relationship with our community investment operations team. Fred and I are always available to help you navigate, but it's really our AHP analysts and our operations team who are the experts from here to help you navigate the disbursement and the monitoring processes. But with that being said, we do hope that you'll continue to engage Fred and myself in how your projects are progressing. So this visual here kind of shows you our district's geography and our coverage. So if you kind of think of State College as a dividing line, everything east of State College in Pennsylvania, including Delaware, Fred is your contact, and everything to the west of State College, including West Virginia, I serve as your contact. For anybody who's outside of our district, you're free to reach out to either one of us. So as you move forward, we'd really like to celebrate those milestones with you. Please know that if you're planning an event like a ribbon cutting or a groundbreaking ceremony showcasing the project, we'd really love to be a part of that. At times we've been able to help our sponsors with highlighting projects through written success stories on our website and other publications. So I'm now going to turn it over to Linda to continue with today's webinar. So thank you to all of you and best of luck as you move forward with developing your projects.
Thanks, Megan. The bank is pleased to be able to continue providing an additional funding opportunity, which is voluntary housing grant funding that runs concurrently with our AHP round. And this additional funding was made available to projects within our district of Pennsylvania, Delaware, and West Virginia. The Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative is separate and distinct from the Affordable Housing Program, meaning it does not fall under the Federal Housing Finance Agency's Affordable Housing Program regulation, but it does use the same infrastructure as AHP. So, while most of the information in this webinar will apply to you, there are a few important differences to be aware of. First, you will be using different versions of some key project administration documents. Voluntary housing grant awardees must make sure they're using the correct version of the grant and monitoring agreement, and vice versa. AHP awardees must make sure they use the correct versions of the documents. Similarly, voluntary housing grant awardees must use the correct real estate retention agreement or rider to secure the affordability of the project. All of these voluntary housing grant documents are available on our website. The documents are clearly marked in the header field. For example, voluntary housing grant or AHP. But if you have any questions about which documents to use, please contact your portfolio analyst and they'll be happy to help. Second, because the voluntary housing grant is an initiative of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh and not a statutory program like AHP, these projects have slightly different compliance requirements, and we will continue to note these differences throughout the webinar. The Voluntary Housing Grant Program Manual, also available on our website, will detail these differences. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing the guiding policy document for both of these programs, which is the AHP Implementation Plan. As we continue to go through our presentation, you'll notice here at the bank we love acronyms. For example, we refer to the Affordable Housing Program as AHP and the implementation plan as I-Plan. As I stated, the I-Plan is our policy document that governs both AHP and voluntary housing grant projects, and it remains an important document to reference as you continue throughout the project development lifecycle. The AHP I-Plan is updated annually, and it complies with the Federal Housing Finance Agency, FHFA, AHP regulation, which governs AHP. The FHFA is the Federal Home Loan Bank's regulator or boss of the entire Federal Home Loan Bank system, and every Federal Home Loan Bank is subject to an annual examination. Our annual I-Plan takes into account regulatory requirements, scoring information, and feasibility guidelines. We understand that in many of these project development deals that we are not always the sole or primary funder. Other funders have their own separate rules and guidelines. And while some of these rules and guidelines complement AHP or voluntary housing grant scoring and feasibility, they are not the same. I want to stress this because it's important to be aware of the differences between multiple funding sources used in your project before you get too far along in the development process. A little homework now can save a headache later. Familiarity with our I-Plan is key. So we do realize that over 50 plus pages, it's a lengthy document and can seem intimidating or overwhelming. But don't let this scare you. You only need to be familiar with the portions of the I-Plan that are applicable to your project. Make sure you take the time to understand what you agreed to within your approved AHP or voluntary housing grant project. If you are not sure, please ask because you are on the hook for everything you agreed to in the application. Since you need to refer back to the implementation plan throughout the development process and post-completion retention period, make sure your project stays in compliance. This document is always on our website. Our website will have the current I-plan and prior year I-plans for reference. It's recommended you print out the I-plan and become familiar with it as part of your overall project record. Because of the longevity of a project, which is 5 years post-completion or homeownership for sale projects, or 15 years post-completion compliance for a rental project, it's a good idea to save all project records, preferably electronically, in a secure file accessible to those within your organization who will be working on it. More often than not, the person who started the project lifecycle process may not be the one to finish it. You may get a promotion, retire, or hit the lottery. So, keeping good project records will ensure a seamless transition for any staff changes, but it will also make your life easier if you do happen to be the person working on the project from beginning to end. It's a win-win for everyone involved and will save hours of time when you need to refer back to something that happened with your project years ago. Now, there's a reason we update the I-plan every year, and I want to give a real life example so you know which I-plan to refer to. You may be considering submitting a new application for the 2025 funding round. So you would need to consult the 2025 I-plan as there could be new scoring guidelines or other relevant changes. But when you're working on your 2024 project that was approved in the 2024 round, you must use the 2024 I-plan. And your approved project is checked against the implementation plan at 3 distinct points in time. The first point in time already occurred, and that was at application approval. We reviewed and scored and underwrote your application against the I-plan, and that was how we determined your project was eligible for an AHP award or voluntary housing grant funds. Now, the next phase in time is the disbursement phase. Now, at this point in time, it's likely the development budget has changed, and the bank will do another feasibility analysis and underwriting to make sure your project continues to comply with feasibility and scoring commitments made in the approved application. And the third major point in time where we do a full underwriting and feasibility review is when your project is complete. We confirm that all project commitments were met and continue to remain in compliance with feasibility guidelines from the year of project approval. So therefore, if your 2024 project is not complete until, say, 2026, when we do the project completion monitoring review, we are looking to scoring and feasibility guidelines from the 2024 AHPI plan. And there will be more discussion on this later during the monitoring section of our webinar. Now I would like to turn the presentation over to Alexis Narotsky, who will provide information and pointers on navigating the bank's website.
Thanks, Linda. Next, let's review how to access the bank's website, since this is how all transactions will be processed, including but not limited to disbursements, extensions, and semi-annual progress reports, which you may hear referred to as SAPRs. As noted at the top of the screen, our AHP website can be found at fhlb.pgh.com/AHP. You may want to consider bookmarking this screen or one of the following for easy access to all things AHP, as well as voluntary housing grant items. The main text of this page also provides details on AHP and VHG. Items in navy blue at the bottom of the screen, which is not visible in the slide, provide step-by-step guidance on how to learn about and submit applications. But since you've all applied and been awarded, we'll skip those items. I want to call to your attention the circled AHP update section on the left-hand side of the page, just under the Forms and Resources link. Please check this section for brief announcements. From time to time, we also update the website with important details, usually found at the top of the main page in red. It's circled here to call it to your attention. If you have general questions, you can email the AHP inbox at ahp@fhlb bank-pgh.com. But please note, we recommend reaching out directly to your assigned analyst with any project-related questions you may have. When you're on the AHP webpage, you'll see a picture of someone writing or signing documents in the upper left. What you might not see is the text that says AHP Forms and Resources. We've circled it here. This image is clickable, and it's the most efficient way to access our current forms, including VHG forms and resources as well. If you take away anything from my portion of the webinar, it should be this, that the image is clickable, and that's how you can get to all of our forms and additional resources. By clicking on the AHP Forms and Resources link on the main page, image of the hands, you will be directed here. During the disbursement phase of the project, you'll likely need to reference either the Using AHP funding, which is in the darker blue bottom middle, or for a voluntary housing grant project, the Using VHG funding, which is in the lighter blue bottom right. These pages will have all of the forms you might need to submit for both disbursements and monitoring. I recommend confirming that you're using the most current versions of forms before you submit documents to us for review, since our forms are updated frequently as part of compliance changes or process improvements. I also highly recommend clicking on the AHP guides and webinars, which is in the darker blue top middle, because there are a lot of really great resources that were created to help guide sponsors through our processes. Please note that the guides and webinars are applicable for both AHP and Voluntary Housing Grant Awards. Also worth noting, the guides are further split by project year, so the projects awarded through 2018 are different from those awarded after 2018. So just be sure you're referencing the correct version for your 2024 awarded projects. As I mentioned on the previous page, the guides and webinars are split out by project year, those awarded before 2018 and after 2018. Additionally, we have separate homeownership versions and rental versions of the guides. These guides are a wonderful resource complete with screenshots to help you. We keep them up to date based on system enhancements as well as feedback we receive from our users. So while it's great to save the PDF to your desktop for easy reference, you might want to bookmark the page instead so you always view the most current version. For homeownership projects, I also recommend watching the income webinar to learn how to document income correctly, what documents are acceptable, when to qualify participants, and how to submit the documentation at disbursement. For additional income questions, both homeownership and rental projects, you should be reviewing the income guidelines, which are available in the AHP Guides and Webinars color block. The final item on this slide is registration. At this point in the process, you should all have access to the AHP online system, either as a member contact or a lead sponsor contact. If you have trouble accessing it, please reach out to us directly. More importantly, contact information for projects should be kept as current as possible during the funding period and during the monitoring period, which is 5 years after completion for homeownership projects and 15 years after completion for rental projects. We use this contact information regularly to send important AHP communications, everything from round information to compliance items. So if your project contacts aren't current, you will be missing out. If you experience a change in staffing, please refer to the sponsor registration guide. And if you're still stuck, just reach out to the AHP mailbox for assistance. That concludes the Navigating the Bank's website portion of the webinar, and Zanat will now present on disbursements.
Thanks, Alexis. So I will now be discussing the disbursement process from awarded to funded. So you will receive your final commitments and close on all sources of funds, start your project, incur eligible costs, satisfy conditions, initiate your disbursement in the AHP system. The sponsor organization will approve the disbursement, and then the member bank will approve the disbursement. Once it is member bank approved, the FHL bank will review and approve the disbursement, and the funds will be sent to the member's FHL bank account. Once that occurs, the member can then forward the funds to the sponsor organization. One important thing to note is that after the disbursement is member approved, there is up to a 15 business day window for the FHL bank staff to review. If any clarifications are needed, this can add additional time to the overall review process, as all items must be adequately explained and issues resolved before the FHL bank approves the disbursement request. On February 12th, you received a post-award email from me with relevant award links and the contact information for your project's assigned analyst. This is your go-to person should you have any questions. As a reminder, the subsidy is funded on a reimbursable basis after the eligible cost has been incurred. Each project has unique conditions, some of which need satisfied prior to funding. You are currently able to view your project's conditions in the AHP system. Regarding the requirements for owner-occupied projects, funds will not be dispersed until the final commitment and closing of all sources of funds. For homeownership rehab projects that are currently occupied, the rehabilitation must be complete before the project can seek reimbursement for that unit. For homeownership for sale projects, the construction must be complete and the unit sold before the project can request reimbursement for that unit. The minimum draw provision states all homeownership projects must request at least 25% of the AHP subsidy awarded, or at least 25% of the units in the project in each disbursement request. Moving on to the requirements for rental projects. Again, the funds will not be dispersed until the final commitment and closing of all sources of funds. The minimum draw provision for rental projects states they must request at least 33% of the subsidy in each disbursement request. For example, if a project was awarded $500,000 in total AHP subsidy, then each disbursement request must be for at least $165,000, except for a project's final request, which may be less than the established threshold. Regarding construction completion threshold, FHL Bank will only reimburse soft and hard costs proportionate to the amount of the total hard construction complete. For example, if the AHP project's total hard construction costs are $1 million and the project was awarded $750,000 in AHP subsidy, once the project has completed $330,000 of the total hard construction costs, which amount to 33% of the construction complete, they can request reimbursement for 33% of the total AHP subsidy, or $247,500. Based on how you complete the AHP subsidy use certification, we'll be able to determine the percentage of hard construction completed to date. So, in order to determine if the project is eligible to submit a disbursement request, the total AHP grant amount times the percent of hard construction complete must be equal to or greater than the total AHP grant amount times 33%, which is the minimum draw. The FHL Bank may request a letter certifying that the project has secured all necessary permits to start and complete construction and has secured the necessary type of insurance relevant for the project. Moving on to the My Projects page, you will see this page when you log into the online system. It's important to point out that you'll be unable to initiate a disbursement if you have any expired commitment or an outstanding semi-annual progress report. The current project summary. This page will populate when you click on a specific project number in the AHP system. It shows you the status of the outstanding conditions and the required documents. Moving on to household income. Projects must meet household income targeting approved at application. Household income documentation is required for owner-occupied projects at disbursement, while for rental projects, it's required at project completion. To ensure correct income calculations, review the income guidelines document on our website. This document explains what should and should not be included when calculating total household income, as well as acceptable documentation types. Regarding forms, for rental projects, the income calculation form must be used to calculate the total household income. For owner-occupied projects, the income workbook must be used and uploaded to the disbursement request. It is important to review the income workbook webinar on our website. A few other items to note about income qualifying. When calculating income from pay statements, 3 consecutive pay statements are required. Include all household individuals such as minors and those without income. and also have a zero income certification completed for all those 18 and older without income. Also, always qualify income based on a point in time calculation. For owner occupied projects, this is determined at the time the household is qualified for participation in the program. For rental projects, this is determined at lease up, unless it is a rental rehab project with existing tenants. In this case, the income is determined at the time the application is submitted. Now I'll go over the external statuses of a disbursement request in the AHP online system. Pending means the disbursement is initiated but not complete. Sponsor approved means the disbursement still requires member approval. Member approved means the disbursement was submitted to the FHL Bank staff. Under review means FHL Bank is reviewing the disbursement request. The reviewer has up to 15 business days to review and reach out to the sponsor organization concerning any clarifications needed. And lastly, funded means the disbursement funds were approved and the money was sent to the member bank. Speaking of the pending status, this is a visual reminder that in order to complete the disbursement request, all sections must be completed and have a green check mark before the sponsor can hit the approve button. Once the approval button is selected, the status will change to sponsor approved and forwarded to the member bank for approval. We have a lot of great resources on our website. Please refer to the sponsor and member disbursement guides, the income guidelines, and the income workbook webinar. Regarding the financial feasibility workbook, make sure to update the workbook with current figures, remove contingency, and as well as remove contingency from the financial workbook if construction has been completed. Regarding retention documents, for for sale projects, they have a required retention agreement template to be completed by the home buyer and the member bank, which is available on our website. A reminder for sale projects, since the online system will only allow you to initiate a disbursement request in whole dollars with no cents, the retention agreement also needs to be in whole dollars in order to match the subsidy request you initiate in the system. Rental projects have a retention agreement rider template, which accompanies the mortgage or the deed of trust. Please send draft retention documents to your assigned analyst for review prior to executing. And lastly, the subsidy use certification is required for all disbursement requests. FHL Bank will not accept actual subsidy use certification, actual subsidy use documentation, such as invoices or AIAs, unless directly requested by us. So that concludes the disbursement overview, but I'd like to briefly discuss what to do if a project encounters any change from application. So the FHFA regulation that governs AHP states commitments made in the application must be kept. Any change to the project's commitments from application is considered a modification. Any request for a project modification will be subject to the cure first requirement, which requires the project to demonstrate reasonable efforts were made to fix the non-compliance before providing the modification request to FHL Bank. It is important that the project not deviate from the approved application. But if something comes up, please reach out to your assigned analyst for how to proceed. Please note that the voluntary housing grant projects are exempt from the cure first requirement. I will now pass it on to Alexis. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. I would like to go over a brief overview of the monitoring process, focusing on the monitoring processes of an active project, one that's in construction or disbursement phase. As a high-level overview, FHL Bank Pittsburgh is required to monitor AHP and voluntary housing grant projects to ensure compliance with commitments made by the project at application and with the regulation overall. We review the project's development progress, conformance to our feasibility guidelines, and we validate that scoring commitments made at application are happening as outlined in the implementation plan throughout the project's retention period. The retention period, which also may be referred to as the compliance period, varies by project type. For homeownership projects that are not considered owner-occupied rehab, the retention period lasts for 5 years. Just as a side note, retention is prohibited for OOR projects. For rental projects, the retention period lasts for 15 years. FHL Bank will determine the date of completion, but for your reference, the definition of complete is available in the implementation plan. And there are 3 phases or levels of monitoring: extensions and semi-annual progress reports, which happen during the construction phase; project completion report, which happens after completion of the project; and the long-term monitoring, which is applicable to certain rental projects that are non-LIHTC. For the purposes of today's webinar, I'm going to focus on extension requests, semi-annual progress reports, and our minimum progress expectations. The AHP and voluntary housing grant funds expire 12 months after award. If you need additional time to draw down remaining funds, you'll be required to submit an extension request through the AHP online system. Extensions are based on project milestones. So what's the next big thing for the project, rather than simply project completion date? If the major milestone is not met and an additional extension is needed, you'd follow the same process. It's important to demonstrate that you're making progress with the project, even though an extension is being requested. We ask that you submit about 2 weeks before the expiration date, but not more than that. The extension request is completed in AHP Online and certified by the sponsor. Member approval is not required. And when submitting an extension request in AHP Online, you must complete all screens, which is evidenced by green check marks, and certify the extension request. The bank is only notified of the extension request if it's been certified. Otherwise, it's considered incomplete. If there's an outstanding semi-annual progress report due, it actually must be completed first. So that brings us to semi-annual progress reports, which are also referred to as SAPRs and are due twice a year, January 31st and July 31st, until the project is deemed complete. You will receive a system-generated email reminder notifying you when this is due and past due. Like extension requests, these are completed in AHP Online and certified by the sponsor. Member approval is not required. In the SAPR, you'll provide information on the project's progress and level of compliance with approved application. After submitting a SAPR, an analyst will review and determine if the progress is satisfactory based on the following: the level of compliance with the approved application. So is the project doing what it committed to at application? The disbursement timeline. So will the funding be used in a timely manner as outlined in the implementation plan? The construction timeline. Will the construction or the rehab of the units be completed in a timely manner? And the completion timeline. So will the project be complete within 48 months of application approval? For those of you who've already read the implementation plan, the table below will look familiar. In both processes, extension requests and SAPRs, the minimum progress expectations will be considered for each project to ensure the project continues to move forward in a timely manner. So what happens if your project isn't meeting the requirements? In most cases, FHL Bank can continue to move forward with the project with projects who can satisfactorily provide rationale for not meeting the minimum progress expectations. In rare instances, we may ask you to withdraw and reapply in another funding round. The key takeaway here is that if your project is experiencing unexpected delays, please reach out to us so we can discuss the best way to move forward. The next 2 processes occur once a project is deemed complete by FHL Bank. When a project is complete, you will be required to submit a project completion report, often abbreviated as PCR, through the AHP online system. There are a handful of screens that you will need to complete. Another place you'll need to get the all green check marks and formally submit the PCR. When the PCR has been submitted, an analyst will review the report to determine compliance with the approved application scoring requirements, implementation plan, and regulations. It's also worth noting here that the overall PCR progress process is lengthy. Based on internal and external factors, PCRs begin collecting data immediately after the project is completed, but the formal report may not be completed for more than a year, so your patience is appreciated. As previously mentioned, monitoring begins once the project has been deemed complete by FHL Bank. All projects must remain in compliance throughout the retention period. For many projects, there are two pieces to long-term monitoring: annual long-term certifications and the long-term rent and income monitoring. Given that these processes are quite a bit in the future, we'll just touch on them. And as a reminder, these are not applicable to all projects, but rather subsets based on project type. To see if they apply to your project, just refer to the implementation plan. Annual certifications are due annually. These will be submitted through AHP Online. There is a guide to walk you through step by step in the process. The long-term certification will ask the project owner to confirm and certify income and rent compliance, occupancy, and financial viability. Again, this is required annually throughout the 15-year compliance period. If your organization experiences staffing changes, ensure the correct contacts are updated in AHP Online. And you can see the sponsor registration guide for step-by-step details on that. If contacts are not updated, you will not be able to certify in the system, and that will be an issue. FHL Bank is also required to review income and rent compliance on a schedule or frequency based on the project's funding characteristics. Please refer to the monitoring section of the implementation plan, which you're all going to bookmark like we recommended, for additional details. We will reach out every 2, 4, or 6 years to initiate the process. Generally, the more AHP subsidy in a project, the more frequently this process occurs. As part of this process, the project is required to submit income documentation from the time of tenant move-in, or in the event that the tenant is living there at the time of AHP application, then the income is required to be from the date of AHP application. So in your case, August 2024. I cannot stress enough how important it is to maintain good tenant records. Please review our income guidelines, which are available on our website, to understand what is required for income qualification. AHP does not allow or accept annual income recertifications. Be sure you are maintaining documentation from move-in. During this process, we are looking at a sample of income and rent documentation. We will request the sample and may adjust and/or expand the sample as needed. This particular process can be lengthy and sometimes challenging, which is why maintaining tenant records is so important. As noted on the screen, there are exceptions to monitoring requirements and/or the level of documentation required. As a final note on the income and rent compliance monitoring, if down the road the project receives LIHTC funding or other funding from PHFA, perhaps part of a future renovation, please let us know and we will adjust the monitoring requirements for that project accordingly. That wraps up our monitoring overview, and I will turn it back over to Zanat.
Thank you, Alexis. So before we jump into the Q&A, we want to provide you with the contact information for the AHP team. Please reach out to your portfolio analyst directly with any project-specific questions, or email ahp@fhlb-pgh.com if you have more general questions. As a reminder, this recorded webinar will be available on our website, along with many other helpful resources. We are looking forward to working with you in 2025 and beyond. Rhiannon will now be happy to answer questions you may have, so you can please add any questions in the Q&A box.
All right, thank you, Zanette. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A box. I've been answering some of them as the presentation has been ongoing. I do want to request for anyone who is listed as an anonymous attendee, if you could please add your name when you ask the question, just so I can follow up with you if needed after this this session here. So someone has a question about, are you able to request a percentage of funds upfront for construction? So no, as discussed in the disbursement section of this presentation, you have to have a portion of construction complete. That depends on your project type. So make sure you refer back to those slides. We also have a question about voluntary housing grant projects. Are voluntary housing grant projects with a low-income housing tax credits exempt from long-term monitoring with FHL Bank Pittsburgh? Yeah, so just like the Affordable Housing Program, any projects that receive a voluntary housing grant, if they have low-income housing tax credits as part of the deal, you are exempt from the long-term monitoring. So you do still have to submit your project completion report. And we do also have a long-term monitoring form specific to voluntary housing grant projects that you will have to submit, but you are exempt from the regular long-term income and rent reporting. All right. There's a question about the contact information associated with your projects. So can you only have 2 contacts who can access the disbursement portal on our website? Yeah, so at this time, only 2 project contacts can access the disbursement portal and receive those email notifications. So one thing that I would recommend if you want more people to receive that is just make sure you're forwarding that information. At this time, that functionality is limited to just 2 project contacts, and those have to be the sponsor contacts. So if you have a consultant that you've been working with, they are not able to access the disbursement portal. So there's a question about the semi-annual progress reports. When is the first semi-annual progress report due? So the first one for projects that received 2024 award will be, you'll have to report on the January to June 30th period. So that'll be due at the end of July, and you'll receive notifications through AHP online on those due dates. You'll get several reminders. So make sure your project contact info is up to date so you can get those notifications and submit the information in time. All right, there's a clarification question on the modification process. We noted that there are a few differences between the voluntary housing grant and the affordable housing program as it pertains to modifications. That difference is that if you have a voluntary housing grant award, you are not subject to what's called the good cause requirement not good cause, cure first requirement for requesting a modification. So AHP projects, they're under the AHP regulation. The voluntary housing grant, that's just an FHL Bank product that we offer. So because of that, we do not require projects to show that they tried to cure the issue that's requiring the modification. So you still have to provide a good reason for why you need to adjust your project, but you don't have to show that, hey, we've tried everything that we could to fix this without requesting a modification. That gets pretty nuanced, so I definitely recommend if you have any changes to your project from what you submitted at application, it's really important to just reach out to your assigned analyst and go through your questions, because it varies greatly project to project, and there's lots of nuances in our modification process. So we'll help you through that, but it's just really important to get in touch with your assigned analyst right away. So also relating to modifications, there's a question on, if you have a voluntary housing grant project and you change your number of units, does that require our approval? Yes. So any change to your project, regardless of whether you have an affordable housing program grant or a voluntary housing grant, you need to get our approval before making that change. Because if you change your project, you move forward with it, and you don't have our approval, then there's a potential there that we won't be able to disperse the funds to you. We may have to withdraw our funding approval. So again, if you anticipate any project changes, just contact us soon as possible. All right. So there's a question on your budget. So if your budget has changed, like increased or decreased from application, does that require a modification? Typically not. But again, if you anticipate like big project changes, like if there's a funding source that's changing, maybe just get in touch with your analyst and we can kind of look into that and just confirm. But typically, you know, budget changes aren't going to require a modification unless it's going to trigger some other changes with your project. Okay. And there are probably going to be some questions here that we're not going to be able to get to, or maybe they're super specific to your project. And in that case, I'll make sure to follow up with you, or a member of our team will follow up with you offline. Okay. There is a question about how you get your member contact information into the AHP online portal. So if you have questions on if you're a sponsor and you're not sure if your member has the right access that they need, again, contact our team and we can connect with the member financial institution that's partnered on your project and make sure that they have the right access needed there. All right, there is a question about the retention document. So both the Affordable Housing Program and the Voluntary Housing Grant requires that you have a retention document, which we also refer to as the AHP mortgage. So that is separate from, like, let's say you have a loan from your member on the project as part of your project financing. So this is totally separate. This is just a soft mortgage to secure the affordability of your project. And that's why we have specific requirements and language on what's in that mortgage. I definitely recommend, if you are not sure kind of how to put that together, take a look at the documents. There's a form, like a standard document for owner-occupied or homeownership projects. But for rental projects, you are typically going to use whatever standard commercial mortgage format your member is going to use. So if you're new to AHP or the Voluntary Housing Grant, you know, we understand that you'll probably have questions on that. So reach out to your analyst and we, you know, are happy to kind of walk you through what you need to do for that. But just to confirm, it is separate from any other mortgage that you have on the property. It's just related to the amount of the AHP award. So let's say you received a $500,000 grant, the AHP mortgage or voluntary housing grant retention, that's going to be for $500,000. Right. So there are some questions about when the 2025 implementation plan will be released. That will be coming out in the next few weeks here on our website, and we will definitely send out a communication when that's available. So it'll be out soon. I don't have a specific date yet, but within the next few weeks. So there's a question about, okay, if we have a ribbon cutting, a groundbreaking, who should we reach out to for guidance? So Megan Kreider and Fred Banuelos are our community investment business development managers. Their contact information is included in this presentation, and you would want to reach out to either of those folks for some information on what we whether or not we're going to if you want us to attend, or if you would like a copy of our logo, things like that. So this slide deck is going to be posted on our website as well as the recording, so you'll be able to view that contact information. There was also a question on, there's some questions here in the chat about the formula for determining whether or not you can request a disbursement. So that information is included in the slide deck, so you will be able to view that as well. You'll also be able to go to the disbursement guides on our website, which include, again, all the information in more detail here. So I see we do have a few more questions that I'm not able to answer at this time, but we'll be following up with any unanswered questions after this presentation. And you can always reach out to your assigned analyst or AHP at FHLB-PGH.com if you have any additional questions. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this presentation, and congratulations again on your award. We are absolutely thrilled to partner with you on seeing these affordable housing projects being completed. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Thursday. Thank you.